But I'm going to go ahead and get the program started with a general overview of the resistance at Amache. So there was, with the success of the Nisei soldiers in the army, there was a call for volunteers in the camps. And although Japanese American men were first labeled enemy aliens, they were being drafted all of a sudden because they couldn't find enough volunteers. Hundreds volunteered, but not enough. And soldiers of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, 100th Battalion, and Military Intelligence Service distinguished themselves with valor. Great irony, they were asked to fight for freedoms that they did not even have, nor their families had. There was ostracism by the JCL leaders, Japanese American Citizens League leaders, of the resistors, of those who refused to fight while their families were in prison. For instance, Saburo Kido, the national JCL president in 1944, said, "The group at Heart Mountain definitely should be charged with sedition, especially the leaders." After the war, the JCL turned on the resistors and journalist James Omura, who was writing editorials in support of the Heart Mountain Fair Play Committee. Many were fired from their jobs because of the JCL's influence. And Jimmy Omura, who was a gifted journalist, even found himself fired from the Rocky Shimpo, couldn't find work as a journalist and became a landscaper and never found work as a journalist again. People picked up their lives, even though they were labeled as pariahs. Parents also suffered greatly. Jim Makutsu, who was a model of the John Okada's Nono Boy from Seattle, recounted how his mother committed suicide as her social circle disappeared and she was told not to come even to her own church. The Heart Mountain Sentinel, the official camp newspaper, called the draft resistor variously stubborn and intensely bitter, deluded youths, and warp-minded members who made wild-eyed statements and lacked both physical and moral courage. July 1, 1944 editorial said loyal Japanese Americans as a whole condemned the Fair Play Committee and the action of the 63 defendants as being a serious attack on the integrity of all Nisei as a sneak attack on Pearl Harbor. Even in the 1990s, there was ostracism by Nisei veterans. In this Wall Street Journal article, Teruo Nobori called them cowardly draft dodgers. And Carl Kinaga, a community leader in San Jose's Japanese American community, called the resistors traitors and said that their fathers were pro-Japan, which of course wasn't true. At Heart Mountain, they had the largest organized resistance, and the only organized resistance, actually. In their words, they made statements that said, "We, the members of the Fair Play Committee, would gladly sacrifice our lives to protect and uphold the principles of our country as set forth in the Constitution and Bill of Rights. But have we been given such freedom, such liberty, such justice, such protection? No. The Fair Play Committee believes it has a right to ask for a full restoration of our rights before being drafted into the armed forces." Frank Emmy, one of the 7 leaders, said, "I could not believe that the government could actually put us in camp, strip us of everything, and then order us into the military as if nothing had happened." In Wyoming, a group of 63 of the Heart Mountain resistors waived their right to a jury trial and were tried by a federal district judge, which remains the largest mass trial in Wyoming history. The judge dismissed out of the hand the resistors' constitutional objections to their incarceration and convicted them and sentenced them to 3 years in federal penitentiaries. The resistors at Tule Lake, however, they were the only ones that were exonerated. In the summer 1944, Judge Lewis E. Goodman from San Francisco heard the prosecutions of the 27 young men who resisted the draft at the Tule Lake Segregation Center, and the plight of these young men struck Goodman differently. And there you see Jimmy Yamaichi, one of the 27 in the Kuwabara case. Judge Goodman, who rendered his decision, he was so scared of the reaction that he left his car running and ran into the courtroom, made his decision, and came back out. And the decision was made in Eureka. So he said, "It is shocking to the conscience that an American citizen be confined on the ground of disloyalty, and then, while under duress and restraint, be compelled to serve the armed forces or prosecuted for not yielding to such compulsion." There were resistors in many of the camps. Poston had the most, of course, Heart Mountain, second. There were resistors at Minidoka, Amache, Tule Lake, and Jerome. The purpose of today is talking a little bit more about the resistance at Amache, also known as Grenada. So what were the goals of the resistors at Amache? to release parents of draftees to have the right to be inducted into all service, not just the Army, and left the West Coast ban on Japanese Americans, as well as counter-violent incidents against Japanese Americans. They're basically fighting the constitutionality of the camps. These are some articles that were given to me by George Nozawa of the late George Nozawa, a Heart Mountain Fair Play Committee resistor. And this details people getting picked up. You see Hiroshi Yamauchi, a good friend of my dad's in Sacramento, getting picked up on the left. Jimmy Kawasaki, Katsuma Yoshikawa being picked up. And you start to see these are in various newspapers like the Rocky Shimpo in Denver and the Pacific Citizen. And this one, our special guest today, Susumu Inokita, in the June 28, 1944 edition of the Rocky Shimpo. Susumu Inokita, 19, and Kenji Akita, 18, were found guilty on 2 counts of draft evasion. The second article is from the Heart Mountain Sentinel, and that also, I believe, that also mentions Susumu's conviction. And actually, these are all about Susumu getting convicted. We have a number of newspapers clippings as well. This is Denver Post and the Wyoming Eagle. This is Hitoshi Inaba. Hitoshi flew Inaba when he was sentenced. There's mention of him, as well as Joe Kashiwagi Minoru Inokita, which is Susumu's older brother, and Yoshimitsu Ishikawa. And the document on the right is when I went to the Denver National Archives, was able to photocopy all the court documents of the 3 dozen resistors. And this is the sentencing of Hitoshi Inaba on October 1, 1944. Mr. Inaba would later, with his brothers, start the North American Food Distributing Company, which exists today, run by his son and his family in West Sacramento, my hometown. 4 more Amache resistors, including my father on the left, Noboru Taguma, were convicted as well. This is interesting. Everybody, I don't know everybody, but a lot of people know about Travis Ishikawa, who hit the game-winning walk-off home run in 2014 National League Championship Series. It was the 3rd World Series run in 5 years for the Giants. But years later, 70 years earlier, his father, Yoshimitsu Dix Ishikawa, was a hero of a different kind. Dix Ishikawa, who was born in Woodland in 1916, was one of the 35 Nisei draft resistors out of the Granada camp who went on to be sentenced to Tucson. According to records, he was sentenced to 8 months in prison and was personally transported on November 13, 1944 by U.S. Marshal A.D. Fairbanks. And to the right is the article from the November 6, 1944 Denver Rocky Shimpo mentioning his arrest or sentence. Along the way, the Granada resistors were visited in jail by JCL representatives. On March 30, 1944, Minoru Yasui, Joe Grant Masaoka, and Sus Hada, 3 representatives of the JCL, visited the Granada resistors at the Department of Justice Federal Correction Institute at Inglewood, Colorado. And to the right is a picture of that institution. Their purpose was to persuade the boys, if possible, to change their ideas and agree to comply with the draft. However, not one of them changed their mind. They were sentenced to the Federal Prison Camp, honor camp, near Tucson, Arizona, in the Catalina Mountains, Santa Catalina Mountains. And their goals were their tasks were to dynamite and build roads throughout the mountain. This is a story from the Arizona Daily Star in 1998. And that is a photo of what became to be known as the Tucsonians, or the resistors, mostly from Granada and some other camps. This is the kind of work that they did. This is building roads along the mountains. They had to do a lot of dynamite blasting, a lot of putting dynamites in holes. More than 8,000 men worked on the Catalina Highway. This is circa 19 1945, I think, from the Arizona Daily Star. And this is a photo of some of the people working on the roads at the camp. Not sure if this is the Japanese Americans. These are some photos from the camp from confinement and ethnicity, an overview of World War II Japanese American relocation sites by Jeffrey Burton, Mary Farrell, and others. Gives you a shot. On the bottom right, it's a shot of the baseball field. I don't know if Susumu remembers playing baseball. And these are some of the shots of it, I believe, today. The resistors were pardoned by President Truman in 1947. This article in particular has the names of all those who were pardoned. So my father, Susumu, is going to be in there as well. And this is more detail on the reason from the Amnesty Board. They said, although we recognize the urgent necessities of military defense, we fully appreciate the nature of their feelings and their reactions to orders from local selective boards. Prior to their removal from their homes, they had been law-abiding and loyal citizens. They deeply resent classification as undesirables. Most of them remain loyal to the United States and indicated a desire to remain in this country and fight in its defense, provided their rights of citizenship were recognized. So coming home after the war, the Tucsonians, as they called themselves, the resistors that were sent to Tucson, and they were sent to the same federal labor camp as civil rights icon Gordon Hitabayashi, although they were there at different times. They forged friendships in resistance and hard labor. This is the first Tucsonian reunion in Sacramento in 1947. But my father was not in here because he was still serving time. My father is here in the front row. I think that he's second from the left, next to Hiroshi Yamauchi. This is the 20th anniversary, 1965. So the Tucsonians met periodically every few years to get together. So the road to reclamation of history, shedding light on a little known story. The story of the Granada resistors started to go public in about 1992. The Sacramento History Museum was doing an exhibit curated by Wayne Maeda, who was my professor of Asian American Studies at California State, Sacramento. You know, as he said, his eyes lit up when I went after class and told him that my father was a resistor, because he didn't know of any, but he knew there must be some around. So my goal was to do some research with him and put together what became this section of the resistors wall at the groundbreaking Sacramento History Museum exhibit that commemorated 50 years after Executive Order 9066. So on this, you could see the Tucsonians, a couple of photos, my father, as well as some artifacts like a letter he wrote detailing his resistance as 4C, and then basically his kind of oral history. And that's my father with Wayne Maeda, who really helped to bring this story out in the beginning in 1982. At the same time, my father, there was a first of about 7 stories on him and the resistors in the Sacramento Bee. This was timed to coincide with the Sacramento History Museum exhibit. Yeah, he's an unsophisticated farm boy, so I think Wayne came along with the reporter Jeannie Wong of the Bee for the interview. Also in 1992, leading up to this groundswing of support for the resistors, there was a forum at San Jose State University organized by Frank Abe and Frank Chin as part of the Asian American Studies Conference, where they had Heart Mountain Fair Play Committee leader Frank Emi, Fair Play Committee resistor Mitsu Koshiyama, and Nisei journalist Jimio Omura and other resistors gathered for the first time. There they unveiled a huge poster of the courtroom scene where they, each individually signed where they were. So this was quite historic, and some resistors were still hesitant to come out at the time because of the ostracism. This is a coverage of it by J.K. Yamamoto of the Hokubei Mainichi, thanks J.K., of the May 29, 1992 event. There would be a similar event at the Centenary United Methodist Church in Los Angeles' Little Tokyo on February 21, 1993. But this is where you could see there's David Kawamoto, who was later given an honorary degree from San Jose State University because he was not able to graduate during the war. But and then there's Mitsu Koshiyama, Jimmy Omura, and Frank Emi on top in front of the big poster. Now, when you talk about the road to recognition, I think this was particularly important. A couple of days after the gathering at the Centenary United Methodist Church in Los Angeles' Little Tokyo, I had organized the first of a couple dozen programs they organized on the California State University Sacramento campus. We brought Frank Chin, the writer, Frank Emi, the leader of the Fair Play Committee, one of the leaders, and Mitsu Koshiyama to talk about this story of their resistance. And it got picked up in the front page of the Metro section of the B as well. So it would be groundbreaking. Clifford Ueda, who would, go on to champion the resistor story, was there, and someone named Andy Noguchi was there too. And I think this had an impact on him as well as an impact on me. This is a story on the front page of the Metro section of the B, where Frank Emi, the Fair Play Committee leader, recognizes Thomas Kawasaki, a Amache resistor who happened to be there. The road to local recognition. And a year later, almost exactly a year later, the Florin JCL chapter decided to honor the local resistors at their 1994 Time of Remembrance program. They honored 7 local Nisei resistors, including Susumu Inokira, as well as my father Noboru and others, with their Daruma Civil Rights Award. The event was keynoted by civil rights hero Gordon Hirabayashi, who himself was a Nisei draft resistor, and he defied the curfew and relocation orders in Seattle. This is a photo. That day, there was a Nisei Draft Resistors Forum that Clifford Ueda had organized in Oakland at the Oakland Museum. And so a lot of the Heart Mountain resistors were there, including at the left, Yoshi Kuromiya, Mitsu Koshiyama, of course, there's Gordon, and then Frank Emi, the Fair Play Committee leader, next to my father, Noboru. And this is a clipping from the student newspaper that I was publishing about the event, actually written by Andy. The journey back to Tucson. In the late 1990s, the U.S. Forestry Service was looking into renaming the campground after its most famous resident, Gordon Hirabayashi, who worked at the labor camp there. They were informed that there were some 40 draft resistors who were also sentenced there. Apparently, it's something that they didn't know about until I guess I let them know. And so they started to organize around that and bring out folks in 1999 to the site that they did work on. This was a groundbreaking. You see Amache resistors, Joe Norikane on the left, Hideo Takeuchi, Ken Yoshida from Topaz, Gordon Hirabayashi in the center, Congressman, I don't know his name, Harry Yoshikawa, who unfortunately just passed away in Gardena earlier this year. He was a voluntary relocatee to Colorado, but he resisted the draft and would join the 35 Amachians in Tucson. Next to him is Tak Hoshizaki, who is a member of the Heart Mountain Fair Play Committee, my father Noboru, and then Yoshi Kuromiya, who also passed away a couple years ago, a Heart Mountain resistor. This is at the groundbreaking. A couple of us, Joey Norikane, son of Joe Norikane, and myself, we were invited to speak at the event. And a year later, they had a dedication of the kiosk, historic kiosk, which you could see there. And they reunited with a Hopi tribe conscientious objector, Roger Nasevema. And then you have Ken Yoshida of Topaz Resistor, Gordon Hirabayashi, Susumu Inokira, Harry Yoshikawa, and my father Noboru. But it was about 60 years since they've seen each other, but they recognize each other. This is part of the kiosk today that deals with the resistors, and that's the I guess now famous photo of the Tucsonians' first reunion in Sacramento. But it's a multi-panel historic kiosk that informs the visitors of the incarceration and the various issues of civil liberties. This is a sign. My niece Cheryl, thank you for sending me these photos today, and she's pointing to her Ji-chan grandfather, and this was about 3 years ago. Over the years, the Amache resistors found camaraderie with the other resistors from other camps, particularly Heart Mountain. So they would attend events together, whether it's in Northern California, Wyoming, even, or Southern California. The road to recognition in mass media. Okay, in the 1990s, there started to become more books and videos made about the resistors. A Fence Away from Freedom by Ellen Levine was a cleverly put together oral history of a bunch of incarcerees, some of them from Heart Mountain resistors, Amache resistors, and others. It's a great book and very cleverly done. And then in 1999, the Wall Street Journal, of all places, did a front page story on the resistors and the issues of division within the community over their stand. This you could probably you could find on resistors.com, which is Frank Abe's website. And of course, we had two groundbreaking films that came out in 1999 and 2000. First, Rabbit in the Moon by Emiko and Chizu Omori, the Omori sisters, which had interviews with the resistors in there. And then Conscience and the Constitution by Frank Abe, which was dedicated to the resistors at Heart Mountain. And it was, both were award-winning videos. And if you have not seen it, then I highly suggest you do it. They're 20 years old, but they still hold up. And then, we can't thank the Omori sisters and Frank enough for giving voice to the resistors. Eric Mueller in 2001 wrote what I think is the first standalone book on the Nisei draft resistance, Free to Die for Their Country. Did not include Granada resistors, though, but it included Heart Mountain, Tule Lake, Minidoka. And then the coverage in the Nikkei press and the debate that ensued took life in all the Japanese American newspapers. This is a few from the Rafu Shimpo. And in the Rafu Shimpo in particular, there was an ongoing series of debates by back and forth with Frank Emi, the wartime leader of the Heart Mountain Fair Play Committee, and Rafu Shimpo columnist George Horst Yoshinaga, which elevated interest. And I think some resistors would say that it actually helped to have George Yoshinaga provide a counterpoint so they could hash out all the issues. Now, the road to reconciliation, and Andy Noguchi would talk about this in a little bit. There's a movement to recognize the Nisei draft resistors and apologize for not recognizing their principled stand earlier, which led up to the 2000 National JCL Convention in Monterey. Along the way, there were several meetings with JCL groups and veterans groups, and a lot of community education about the stand of the resistors, which was often misconstrued over the years. And in particular, the Pacific Citizen, the National Japanese American Citizens League newspaper, gave a lot of ink to the issue. And thanks to the assistant editor at the time, Martha Nakagawa, who helped to see this was covered fairly and accurately within the pages of the JCL. There were many, many stories, and I think the Pacific Citizen, the role of it cannot be underestimated in terms of helping to change people's minds. The JCL apologized in May of 2002 at the Japanese Cultural and Community Center of Northern California here in San Francisco's Japantown. You have John Tateshi was the national executive director at the time, and Floyd Modi was the national president. And there were some of the resistors and family in the crowd. This is a group of the resistors and their descendants who were honored at that event. Sadly, almost all of them are gone today. This is 19 years ago, except the descendants. Descendants are probably around. This is the reports of the historic ceremony, again in the Pacific Citizen by Martha Nakagawa, and then also in my publication at the time, Nichibei Times. Other books had come out since then. In 2007, America Nikkei Nisei no Chohei Kihi, American Nikkei Nisei Draft Resistance, which is probably the most in-depth book on the subject. That's because it's 700 pages. Unfortunately, not many of us can read it. And Professor Morita, who's a good family friend, he passed away about 3 or 4 years ago. And of course, there's Prisons and Patriots by Kirsten Lyon in 2011, who wrote about the Tucsonians and Gordon Hirabayashi. So we started with some negative comments by people about the resistors. And these are some more positive, trying to end in a positive note here. Of course, you had U.S. Senator Daniel K. Inouye, probably the most visible Nisei veteran, who was consistent and always said that if his family was in camp, he wouldn't know if he would have volunteered. He said, "I don't know. Very likely, I could have told the government to shove it." And then Roger Daniels, a noted historian and author of Concentration Camps USA and other books, said the draft resistors' activities were clearly within the American tradition of reasoned protest. Michi Wegland, the late, great author and activist, author of Years of Infamy, one of the most groundbreaking books on the camp experience, said, "Too long have voices been silenced by pariah-like treatment. These and others who acted in good conscience, refusing to follow orders they considered wrong, are the very people we denigrate as disloyal."